When swimmers have a great kick behind their stroke, they tend to swim pretty fast in freestyle. How do we help swimmers develop that skill? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. Having a great kick is critical for a fast freestyle, but just doing a lot of hard kick sets isn't necessarily going to get the job done. Swimmers have to understand the skill of kicking, and they have to be able to execute that skill while kicking, and more importantly, they have to be able to execute that skill of kicking while they're actually swimming. And they have to be able to do that at high speeds and under pressure. We're going to take a look at all that in this video. We're going to talk about why kicking is so important, what an effective kick is, what an effective kick looks like, why it can be difficult to actually get this skill to show up in races, and then we're going to talk about what it takes, what swimmers need to do, a game plan for improving that skill during training, as well as some example training sets. Let's check it out. Why do the legs matter? Well, the legs are the glue of the stroke. They help swimmers create more propulsion to move them down the pool. The legs help to improve position, which means better alignment and less resistance. And the reason that that's an issue is that the legs tend to sink, and when the arms are pulling in the front half of the stroke, that also has a sinking effect on the legs. And so the faster swimmers want to go, obviously the harder they're going to pull, the more the legs are going to sink, and the harder they're going to have to work with the legs in order to keep the hips up. And that's one of the big reasons you tend to see a big kick in sprinters. Not only are they trying to create a lot of propulsion, but just as importantly, they're trying to keep the hips up, which is harder and harder to do the more and more they use their arms. It's also critical for timing. It can help shift the hips slightly, and that can make a small yet significant difference in order to help the stroke flow, and that means more speed for less effort. Now, when the legs go, we have all the opposite effects. So swimmers get less propulsion from the legs. That in and of itself means less speed, but they also lose their position, which means more resistance, which means even less speed. And that means it's going to take more energy to move through the water, which means they're going to get more tired, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. And they're also going to have less effective timing because the legs aren't helping with those body shifts, those transitions from side to side. Finally, the legs use a lot of energy. And so if they're going to execute all these skills and they're not particularly fit, it's going to cause a lot of problems. Swimmers are going to get tired faster. They're going to lose the beneficial impact of the legs, and the whole thing's going to fall apart. And when you see swimmers fade and they fade bad, a lot of times the legs are gone and then the whole stroke falls apart. So what is effective kicking? So it's definitely not just kicking from the hips with a completely straight leg. It's not just kicking from the knees where the knee just bends like that. It's a pretty complex action that involves the hips and the knees. And when the leg recovers pretty straight and then snaps back through, that's going to create a really big whipping action. And when the foot finally snaps through in the end, that's going to create an acceleration of the foot. That's going to mean a lot of propulsion, and that's going to help swimmers execute an effective kick, moving them down the pool and keeping the hips up in the water. And so that's one of the challenges of executing a great kick, is that swimmers need to manage both the hip and the knees and let that travel through down to the foot, as opposed to working with just the knees and just the hips. And so while it's often thought to be a relatively simple skill, there is some complexity to it. And if swimmers don't manage it well, they can't execute it well, they're going to struggle to have an effective kick. So if we watch these sprinters here, we're going to see that the knee bends there on the down kick, and then it comes straight back up on the up kick. And when the knee finally bends here, it's because he's actually bringing his thigh forward again, and that's what bends the knee, not trying to consciously bend the knee. So a relatively straight up kick right there, and then the leg reverses, and that's what bends the knee, and then the foot smashes through. So straight on the up kick, bent on the down kick, and then smashing through with the foot. And you can see right there, the foot's bent backwards and then flicks through in the end, and that creates that little extra bit of propulsion. It's all coming from the whip that's set up with the straight leg on the recovery. So if we watch again, straight there on the recovery, bent on the way down, straight there on the recovery, bent on the way down, straight there on the recovery, bent on the way down, straight there on the recovery. And so that's a pretty complex movement that's going to be difficult for some swimmers to manage, and that's why getting really good at kicking is more than just working really hard. There has to be that complex wave-like action. So bent on the way down, straight on the way up, and that's what's going to allow that whipping action. So it's straight, and then bam, it whips back down, and that creates a lot of propulsion, and it allows for an effective recovery without creating a lot of resistance by just bending the knee back and forth. So what makes improving the kick difficult? First of all, it happens fast, and so that makes it hard to control the kick. because if swimmers try to think about exactly what they're doing, they try to slow it down, it happens way too slow, and that ends up ruining the entire rhythm of the stroke. And they have to manage those bent and straight kicks all in that compressed amount of time, and they have to do it in an opposite manner. So when one leg is going down, there's going to be a bend to it, and the other leg is going up, it's going to be straight, and then the leg positions switch. That's really difficult to manage in general, but it's even more difficult to manage at really, really high speeds. And even at relatively slow stroke rates, if they're using a 6-beat kick, those feet are moving pretty fast, and that becomes even more true when swimmers are sprinting. And they've got to manage this all while the arms are moving in opposition, and the kick isn't just random, it's tied to the arms as well. And so managing all these different challenges is really difficult, especially at really high speeds, to make it all happen in a fluid and effective manner. And lastly, the legs have to be able to sustain those efforts throughout the entire race distance, because if swimmers lose control of the legs, like we talked about earlier, bad things are going to happen. There'll be less propulsion, swimmers are going to lose their alignment, and they're going to lose their timing, and everything's going to fall apart, and the legs are going to get even more tired, and that's going to make it even more difficult, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. So the skill has to be there, and the fitness has to be there, and swimmers have to make it happen in the context of swimming while using the arms at the same time. So let's talk solutions. Swimmers have to figure out how to kick effectively, how to kick efficiently. They have to learn those key skills at high speeds. They have to manage the bent and straight aspects of the kick. They have to manage that when the legs are moving in opposition, and they have to manage that while integrating the arms as well. And so if we can help swimmers figure out how to do that, how to figure out how to train the legs hard while affecting really good skills, and learn to transition those kicking skills into swimming and also train those skills really hard, we're going to allow swimmers to be really effective at creating a lot of propulsion. First up is vertical kicking, and the reason I like this is because swimmers don't have a preconceived notion of how they should kick when they're vertical kicking. They haven't done a ton of it, most likely, and it's not going to be like just kicking on a board where they're going to fall into the same patterns. So swimmers can actually focus on the skill of kicking, and there's no expectation what it should feel like, and they're not necessarily trying to create or hit certain times. So that alone can be really effective for creating change because it's a different context, different situation, and swimmers are more open to doing things differently. It's also easier to emphasize the up kick and kicking from the hip because you can train the ability to move the legs relatively straight when vertical kicking, and that's a lot easier to do than with on a board, and you can train the skill of actually keeping the legs straight on the up kick, and just as importantly, you can train the fitness of the muscles responsible for pulling the leg back and keeping it straight, and that can sometimes be difficult to do when training on a board, so we can overload that skill, the straight leg up kick, and we can overload the muscles responsible for executing that skill. Just as importantly, you can communicate with swimmers really easily. They're right in front of you, their head's out of the water, you can encourage, you can provide some sort of feedback, and you can help them engage in what they're doing. And finally, vertical kicking can be really difficult. It can be done at full speeds. You can load it. You can use DragSox. You can challenge it in lots of different ways that further encourage them to execute these skills under pressure. So we use vertical kicking to get them to figure out the skill, and we can train the kick by having them do vertical kicking in more and more difficult situations. So here's an example, and this particular swimmer is really focused on keeping the legs relatively straight. So they're really trying to kick from the hips, and you can see that up kick right there is really straight, and then he bends it coming forwards, and that's the emphasis here, is straight on the up kick, and then you can bend it forwards. You can see how that foot snaps through at the bottom. And so it's a lot easier to help swimmers feel that. It's a lot easier to help swimmers execute that, and because he has to keep his head above the water and he's got his arms out in this case, he has to actually create some propulsion or he's not going to go anywhere. So we can have swimmers do a better job with the up kick here, and we can force them to create propulsion on the down kick because they have to keep the head up out of the water. Of course, we can train it hard too, so it's a really powerful strategy for helping create change. Another effective tool that I find to be really useful is kicking on the back. And so when flutter kicking, a lot of work is done on the board and the down kick is often overemphasized. And so as a result, swimmers struggle to execute the up kick effectively. That's a skill, and just as importantly, it's also a fitness issue in that the muscles simply aren't worked as much, they're not as strong, they're not as fit, and so they're not as effective in executing the kick. However, if you flip them on their back, there's going to be a lot more emphasis on the up kick, and that's going to challenge the skill of it, and just as importantly, it's going to challenge the fitness of the legs, both from a strength perspective and from an endurance perspective. And so we can develop more balanced kicking by exaggerating, by overemphasizing the up kick, by having swimmers kick on the back. And of course, this can be done at a range of intensities to challenge the skill in a lot of different ways, and just as importantly, to develop fitness in a lot of different ways. So if swimmers are struggling with the up kick and they tend to do a lot of their kicking with a board, it can be really useful to do some kicking on the back to develop that fitness. So the video is pretty self-explanatory here. They're on streamline, they're on their back, and they're kicking pretty hard. And there's going to be some knee bend, of course, still, but there's going to be more emphasis on the up kick, the more emphasis on driving the fitness in the back of the legs. And of course, you can have them go arms by their side too. That's going to create more resistance on their body. They're not going to be streamlining, and so that can be an overload from a strength perspective as well, and it's still going to emphasize the same skills. A really powerful strategy is kicking with DragSox, and that's because DragSox requires swimmers to execute that whip-like kicking. They have to kick from the knee and the hip, or they just don't go anywhere. It's not going to work. And so if they kick with completely straight legs, they're never going to get that whipping action. They won't create any propulsion. If they just bend the knees, they may get that whipping action going on the way down, but they're just going to pull the leg straight back, and that's going to be like putting on the brakes. And so swimmers learn really, really fast that if they kick in certain ways, they don't go anywhere. If they kick in other ways that are more effective, like the ones we want them to use, they're going to start making forward progress. And of course, the load, by using the resistance, now we've got stronger skills, now we've got stronger legs, and we've got better fitness, and it all happens even faster. So this is a really, really effective tool because swimmers have to kick well and they have to kick hard in order to be effective. And for those reasons, it's a really, really powerful tool. So just like you'd expect, it's just regular kicking, but you're having them use DragSox. And of course, you can do this with a board, you can do it on their stomach, or you can just have them do it with any type of swimming, and that's going to overload the skill and the strength of the legs. Now, once swimmers have a solid understanding of how to kick effectively, the job isn't done because they actually have to learn to use that kick while they swim. And so that's where leg-driven swimming comes in. The goal here is to get swimmers to learn to kick effectively while they're swimming. There's a skill to kicking, we've already addressed that, but there's also a skill to kicking while swimming, and that's what we're going to work on here. So any strategy that encourages swimmers to overemphasize the legs while swimming is going to be effective. And so some different options are, we've got stick drill, and that's where they have an object, typically a small PVC pipe, but also you can use a paddle, and they're swimming, and they hold it with one hand, they take a stroke, and then they grab it with the other, then they take a stroke, and they grab it with the other, and they take a stroke, they grab it with the other, they take a stroke, and obviously they're limited to how fast they can move their arms, and if you ask them to go fast, they're going to have to use their legs to really drive that. And so the goal there is to overemphasize the legs. You can also have them do extreme stroke count swimming. So if they normally take 16 strokes a lap, you can have them take 8 strokes a lap, and you tell them, I want you to ride out the arm, and I want you to just drive the legs really hard to find a way to create speed without picking up the stroke rate. And the only way they're going to do that is by driving the legs really, really hard. You can also use kick swim sets where they go, for instance, 50 kick, 50 swim for 4 100s, and they descend those. The challenge there is you get the legs tired, you get the legs moving, you get the legs working, and then swimmers have to swim on the back end of that. And one, a little bit of fatigue is actually going to help them find and feel their skills, but two, it's going to train them to maintain their legs as they go into that second 50. And finally, you can go swimming with DragSox. And again, that's obviously going to challenge the legs because they've got that extra resistance, and it's going to encourage them to execute really great skills while they're swimming because they're going to have that whipping action to the kick in order to swim effectively with the DragSox. And of course, you can combine these different strategies as well. You can go kick, stick drill, swim sets. You can add DragSox to any of that, and you can combine these in lots of different ways. But again, the idea here is to have an intermediate step between straight up kick work, straight up swimming work. We're going to do some swimming work where the legs are really overemphasized and really challenged. Next up is using resistance. And as we talked about with the DragSox, it has many benefits from a skill standpoint, from a strength standpoint, and from a fitness standpoint. And when you use resistance, you can resist the body. You can have swimmers kick and swim against resistance. So for instance, a parachute, power tower, stretch cord, something like that. Or you can actually resist the feet, whether using DragSox or fins, DragSox and fins, or shoes. And we can use these strategies with any of the different tools that we've talked about so far. So you can use vertical kicking, you can have them wear DragSox, you can have them hold a weight, or you can have them hold their hands above their head, which is going to increase the resistance as well. Kicking on their back, resist the body, resist the feet. Leg-driven swimming, resist the body, resist the feet. So lots of different ways to challenge them by using resistance. It's going to help them feel that pressure on the water. It's going to help them develop a more effective whip-like kick. and it's going to physically challenge them to develop the strength and the fitness to actually execute an effective kick for long periods of time at high speeds, and that's ultimately what they need to do in races. And for all the strategies we talked about so far, regardless of the context, focusing on performance is really important for driving change. If swimmers are executing the different strategies at a higher level, they're getting better at kicking. So can they vertical kick with more difficult hand positions? Can they vertical kick with load? Can they vertical kick with DragSox? Can they do it at high intensities for longer? Can they do more repetitions? Can they do more volume? Those are all ways to increase the challenge. And when they're actually kicking, when they're actually swimming, can they go faster? Can they hold that speed for longer? Can they do it with less rest? It's all about challenging them to improve their skills, improve their kicking over time. You can have them build, you can have them descend, you can have them negative split, you can have them hit certain speeds. It's all really effective at driving change because swimmers have to perform at a higher level. And in order to do that, they need to swim better and they need to sustain those skills for longer periods of time. You can also use pretty strict stroke counts during leg-driven swimming of any kind because that's going to force them to create speed, create performance without just using the arms to compensate. They have to find speed, they have to find change with the legs, and at a minimum, they have to maintain the equality of their legs if they want to go faster. So regardless of the strategy, asking for performance and expecting performance to improve over time is going to be critical for getting the changes that you're looking for. So here's a simple set to start to introduce some of these ideas, more of a skill perspective. So they're going to go 3 rounds through, they're going to go 4 times, 30 on, 30 off vertical kick. They're going to slowly increase the kick rate every 10 seconds, try to be a little bit better. And then after that vertical kicking, they're going to go right into a 50 flutter kick on the back, build a strong. They'll repeat that 4 times. So working on the vertical kick, keeping the legs really straight, and then trying to execute that on the 50 flutter kick on the back, working the up kick, working the kick behind the body. Again, increasing the speed on the 50 and increasing the speed on the vertical kicking. Then they're going to go right into 475s, 25 stick drill, and then a 50 swim. So they're going to overemphasize the legs the first 25, and then go right into the swim, and they're going to try to descend those 1 to 4 using the legs to make that happen. They'll go through the whole thing 3 times. So again, we're starting off with vertical kicking. We're going into flutter kick on the back. We're going into stick drill, and then we're going into regular freestyle. So transitioning from a pretty isolated skill all the way into what we want, which is swimming. And we're challenging them to increase the speed as they go, and we're giving them lots of opportunities to figure out how to put it all together. This set is more of an endurance focus. They're going to go 425s, flutter kick on the back with DragSox. They're going to descend 1 to 4 to fast to set things up. Then they're going to go 4 150s as 50 flutter kick on the back, 50 extreme stroke count, and then 50 free. They're going to descend those 1 to 4 to solid. So moving from kick to a kick-driven swim to regular swim. Again, descending those 1 to 4, and then they're going to back that up with 100 freestyle. They're going to negative split at the same stroke count. They got to use the legs to create speed the second half of each 100. We're going to repeat that same process, except we're going to drop a 150 as we go through, and they're going to go faster as they descend down. So we're setting it up with some speed work on the front end of it, using the DragSox and kicking on the back to work the up kick, and then we're transitioning to using the legs while swimming, and then really doing a great job with swimming. And as we go through the set, the goal is to try to get faster as they go and to keep working on improving that skill and improving and creating more speed. Here we have more of a speed set, so we're going to go 4 rounds through, 2 times 10 on, 50 off, vertical kicking with DragSox, and they're going to go 25 stick drill with DragSox, and they got to go that fast. And so to do that, they can't just move the arms faster, and they have to overcome the resistance of the socks, so they're going to have to create speed by really using the legs. Same thing on the next 25, it's now minimized stroke count and time with the DragSox, again, creating speed as they go. They got to do it with the legs, they got to stay long, they got to use the legs, and they got to overcome the DragSox. 25 freestyle fast here with DragSox. They don't have the stroke count restriction, but again, if they're not good with the legs, they're not effective, they're not going to go fast. 25 fast to finish it off. Just see what they can do, see how much speed they can create using the legs in the context of swimming. On the odd rounds, we're going to add fins to the DragSox to create a ton of resistance on the feet. That's going to really help them develop some strength in the legs, which is what we want if we want to help them go fast. And on the even rounds, it's just going to be the DragSox. And again, moving from the drill, starting to integrate it into swimming, still creating some length while swimming, just letting them go fast, and then taking the socks off and letting them let it rip without any sort of challenge to the legs. It's a great way to develop speed and the skill of kicking at speed in the context of freestyle, which is what going fast is all about. If you want to learn more about how elite swimmers create propulsion in their lower body in freestyle, check out the video below.